My spouse asked me if I could look after her friend's children while she was away on a business engagement. It turned out she was actually vacationing with her old flame. I'm still wrapping my head around this, but up until recently, I believed my life was completely normal. Now here I am, full of doubts, wondering how I could have overlooked the warning signs. This whole thing kicked off a couple of weeks back when my wife, Emily, told me she needed to go on a business trip. She's very driven in her job, working in advertising, so these trips were pretty common. At dinner, she casually brought it up, saying, "I need to head to Dallas for a work event next week. It's just for 3 days, no big deal." I didn't give it much thought. After being married for 8 years, and despite the usual ups and downs, we've always had a solid relationship. Then things got odd. Emily mentioned that her close friend Maggie had a sudden family issue and needed someone to watch her 2 8-year-old twins, Lily and Ben, over the weekend. Emily thought it would be ideal if I did it since I work remotely. It seems strange. I'm not particularly close to Maggie, and she has plenty of family around. But Emily dismissed my concerns, saying Maggie wanted to avoid bothering her family and that it would be a big favor. She said, "It's only a few days and you're great with kids. You'd be doing a huge favor." I should have questioned it more, but Emily was so persuasive. I figured, why not? I could manage a couple of kids for a short time. It was just 3 days, right? So, come Friday, Emily left with her luggage, promising to chat later that night. She looked the part, dressed in a sharp black blazer, ready for her business trip. I jokingly said, "Don't overdo it at work." She chuckled and replied, "Don't let the kids set the place on fire." And then she was gone. The first day went smoothly. The twins were calm, and we played games and watched TV. But as evening fell, there was no call from Emily. Usually, she'd check in daily when away. I sent a text, "Hope you're doing fine," and got a reply hours later. "Swamped with work, we'll talk tomorrow. Love you." That's when I started feeling uneasy. Emily's usually glued to her phone, but I reassured myself she was probably just overwhelmed with the conference. On the second day, things unraveled. Around midday, I received a message from a friend, Sarah, asking, "Isn't Emily in Dallas? She hasn't posted about it. Hope she's okay." It struck me as odd since Emily typically shares pictures on social media during her trips. I replied, "Yeah, she's there. Probably just too occupied." But now I was suspicious. I checked her social media. Nothing. The last update was from a week prior. My mind was racing. What if she was really busy? Or what if something was wrong? That evening, I tried calling her. No answer. I tried again an hour later, and this time she texted back, "Sorry, can't talk. I'm in a meeting." A meeting at 9 p.m.? Something wasn't adding up. At this point, I decided to distract myself by tidying up the house. The twins were asleep, and I figured some cleaning might help clear my head. While I was organizing Emily's desk, a piece of paper caught my eye. It was crumpled up, shoved between some books. I almost didn't look at it, but something told me to check. It was a hotel booking confirmation. My stomach dropped when I saw the location. Miami, not Dallas. The dates were exactly the same as her work trip. And then there was the second name on the reservation, Jason, her ex. At first, I thought I must be imagining things. This had to be a mistake, right? Maybe the hotel made an error. But as I stared at the paper, my mind started racing. Jason was her college boyfriend, the one she used to describe as her what if. They broke up years before we met, but I knew they'd stayed in touch. Emily always said it was platonic and that I had nothing to worry about. But now I wasn't so sure. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe this was old. Maybe she booked it for someone else, but the dates were staring me in the face. And then I remembered something. Emily's suitcase. She'd packed bikinis and summer dresses. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said, "It's hot in Dallas this time of year. Miami, though." Miami made a lot more sense. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Emily and Jason lounging on a beach, sipping cocktails, laughing at how clueless I was. I felt sick, betrayed. But most of all, I felt stupid. How could I have missed this? Was I really so blind? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I called Maggie to ask when she'd be back from her family emergency. Her response floored me. "What? I've been home all weekend. Emily said you offered to babysit so she could focus on work." That's when it hit me. Emily lied, not just to me, but to Maggie too, after finding out Maggie had no family emergency, and that my wife had basically invented a reason to dump her responsibilities on me. I couldn't stop thinking about the hotel booking confirmation. The name Jason haunted me. I kept telling myself, it's not what you think. Maybe there's an explanation. But deep down, I knew I just didn't want to face it yet. The whole time I was babysitting the twins, I couldn't focus. Every time they asked me for a snack or to play a game, my mind wandered back to Emily. Where was she? Was she really in Miami with Jason? The twins, bless their hearts, didn't notice anything, but I was a wreck. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't stop replaying every little thing Emily had said over the past few months. That night, I decided I couldn't just sit around waiting for answers. I had to know for sure, so I did something I've never done before. I opened up Emily's laptop. Now I know what you're thinking, invading her privacy. Isn't that a bit much? Believe me, I felt horrible about it, but at that point, I felt like I had no choice. The trust was already broken. I needed to see if there was anything to confirm my suspicions or, better yet, prove them wrong. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The first thing I opened was her email. There, in plain sight, was a thread between her and Jason. The subject line, "Can't wait to see you in Miami." My heart sank. The emails weren't explicit, at least not most of them, but they were affectionate, playful, flirty. They talked about how excited they were to finally have some alone time, how much they missed each other, and how they'd make up for lost time once they were together. The worst part? The emails dated back months. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. This was planned. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't. I scrolled through email after email, each one another punch to the gut. Jason mentioned how he'd always known she settled for me, and Emily didn't even deny it. She just laughed it off like it was a joke. At that moment, I felt like my entire marriage had been a lie. I was furious, hurt, and humiliated all at once. But the worst part was, I still didn't know what to do. Should I call her and confront her right then and there? Should I wait until she came back and see if she'd confess on her own? Or should I just pack up her stuff and leave it on the curb? I decided I needed more proof. If I was going to confront her, I wanted her to have no way of weaseling out of it. That's when I did something I'm not proud of. I checked her location. We have this app we use to share our locations with each other. It's mostly for convenience, like when one of us is running late or needs to pick the other up. I opened the app, and sure enough, there she was, Miami. At that point, it wasn't even a question anymore. She was lying. She wasn't at a work conference. She wasn't in Dallas. She was in Miami with Jason. I stared at her little pin on the map for what felt like forever. It was like the proof was right there, staring me in the face, and I still couldn't believe it. I kept thinking, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe there's an explanation. But I knew better. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to confront her in person. It sounds crazy, I know, but I couldn't sit at home stewing in my own anger and uncertainty. I needed to see it for myself. So I packed an overnight bag, made sure the twins were taken care of. Maggie came and picked them up. She apologized profusely for the mix-up, even though it wasn't her fault. Then I booked a flight to Miami. The entire plane ride, I felt like I was going to throw up. My mind was racing with every possible scenario. What if I was wrong? What if she wasn't with Jason? But what if she was? What would I even say? When I landed in Miami, I checked her location again. She was at a hotel near the beach. I took a deep breath, grabbed a cab, and headed straight there. When I got to the hotel, I asked the front desk if I could leave a message for my wife. The receptionist looked confused and said, "Oh, Mrs. isn't in right now. She and her husband left about an hour ago." Her husband? I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. My hands were shaking and I could barely think straight. All I managed to say was, "Did they mention where they were going?" The receptionist smiled politely and said, "Yes, they mentioned heading to a restaurant. It's just a few blocks away." I didn't even thank her. I just turned around and started walking. By the time I got to the restaurant, I was shaking with adrenaline. I scanned the tables, and there they were, Emily and Jason, sitting across from each other, laughing, holding hands like they didn't have a care in the world. I stood there for a moment frozen. I wanted to march over and cause a scene, but I also didn't want to make a spectacle of myself. So instead, I walked up to their table, looked Emily dead in the eye, and said, "Enjoy your dinner. Don't bother coming home." Her face went pale. Jason just stared at me, wide-eyed, like he couldn't believe I was real. Emily stammered something like, "Wait, it's not what it looks like." But I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant. I've never felt so humiliated in my life. Final update. I flew back home the next morning, leaving Emily in Miami. She texted me a dozen times, called at least 3 times that I could see, but I ignored all of it. I didn't want to hear whatever excuse she had cooked up. I figured the emails, the hotel booking, and seeing her holding Jason's hand were all the proof I needed. What could she possibly say to make any of this okay? When I got home, I started packing her things. I didn't want her in my house anymore. It felt too personal, too painful to be surrounded by her clothes, her books, Her favorite mug sitting on the kitchen counter like nothing had happened. As I was packing, though, I found something I wasn't prepared for: her journal. Now, I'm not someone who would normally go through someone's private things. Even after everything that had happened, I hesitated. I sat there on the edge of the bed, holding the journal in my hands, trying to decide if I really wanted to open Pandora's box. But after everything I'd already found out, I felt like I had to. I had to know the whole truth. I opened it, and right away, I could tell this wasn't just any journal. It was old. There were entries from years ago, entries written before we were even married. The first few pages were harmless, almost sweet. She wrote about her dreams, her friends, her plans for the future. But then I hit the entries about Jason. In one entry, she described Jason as her soulmate. She wrote about how she'd never felt that kind of connection with anyone else, how he understood her in a way no one else could. But then she wrote about how he refused to commit, how he was afraid of settling down. She ended the entry with, "If Jason doesn't change, I'll have to move on, but I don't think I'll ever stop loving him." The next entry was dated about a year after that. By this point, we'd started dating. She wrote, "Jason is still the love of my life, but I can't wait forever. My name is stable, kind, and dependable. He'll be a good husband and a great father. Maybe love doesn't have to feel like fireworks. Maybe it can just feel safe." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. All those years I thought we had a real connection. I thought we loved each other. But reading her words, it was clear I was the backup plan. The safe choice, the consolation prize. I kept reading, and it only got worse. She wrote about Jason again and again, even after we got married. She wrote about how she missed him, how she wondered what her life would have been like if he'd been ready to commit. She wrote about how she sometimes felt trapped in our marriage, even though she knew I was a good man. The most recent entry was dated just 2 months ago. In it, she wrote about reconnecting with Jason. She described how he'd reached out to her, how they'd started talking again, how he told her he regretted letting her go. She wrote, "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. I feel alive again when I'm with him. I've missed this so much." I slammed the journal shut. I couldn't read anymore. I felt like my entire marriage had been a lie. I thought about all the times I'd supported her, all the sacrifices I'd made for her, all the little moments we'd shared. And now I was realizing that for her, it was all second best. At that point, I decided I wasn't going to wait for her to come home. I texted her a photo of the journal and wrote, "Your stuff is packed. Come get it when you're back." She called me immediately, but I ignored it. She texted, "Please don't do this." Let me explain. But what was there to explain? I'd seen the emails, I'd seen her with Jason, and now I'd read her own words. What more could she possibly say? I wish I could say that was the end of it, but, of course, it wasn't. A few days later, Emily showed up at the house. I told her I didn't want to talk, but she begged me to let her explain. She was crying, saying she'd made a mistake, that she'd been confused, that she didn't mean to hurt me. I let her talk, mostly because I wanted to hear what kind of excuse she'd come up with. But honestly, it was pathetic. She said things like, "I didn't mean for it to happen, and it was just a fling. It didn't mean anything." She said she still loved me, that she wanted to fix things, that she'd do whatever it took to make it right. But then I asked her one question that shut her down completely. If Jason had been ready to commit back then, would you have ever married me? She didn't answer. She just looked down at the floor, tears streaming down her face. That was all I needed to know. I told her to leave. I told her I didn't want to see her, didn't want to talk to her, didn't want anything to do with her. She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I walked to the door, opened it, and waited until she walked out. It's been a week since that day, and I'm still trying to process everything. I've started talking to a lawyer about divorce. I've also started therapy because, honestly, I don't know how to move on from this. How do you trust anyone after something like this? The one thing I keep coming back to is this: I deserve better. I realize now I deserve to be someone's first choice, not an afterthought.